The Screaming Woods, the 1948 Halloween mass death mystery. A dark discovery in the Screaming Woods. On the crisp morning of November 1st, 1948, an eerie stillness hung over the daring woods near Pluckley Village in Kent, England. The autumn fog clung low to the ground, weaving between ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of history in this corner of the British countryside. These woods, known locally as the Screaming Woods due to the blood-curdling sounds that often pierced the silence, were about to reveal one of their darkest secrets. As dawn broke over the forest canopy, local authorities received an alarming report that would forever change the quiet village of Pluckley. What they discovered upon arriving at the scene defied explanation. A grotesque tableau of 20 bodies arranged in a massive pile, their forms still and silent among the fallen leaves. More disturbing still was the revelation that 11 of the victims were children. The victims, all residents of the neighboring Maltmans area, showed no obvious signs of trauma or violence. Their bodies bore no wounds, no marks of struggle, and no indication of how they had met their fate. In death, they appeared almost peaceful, as if they had simply fallen into a deep sleep from which they would never wake. Detective Inspector James Morton, the first senior officer on the scene, noted in his initial report that the positioning of the bodies suggested they had not been placed there by an assailant. Rather, it appeared as though the victims had collapsed where they stood, their bodies falling naturally atop one another in what he described as an unprecedented scene of mass death. The discovery sent shockwaves through the surrounding communities. Pluckley Village, already known for its supernatural legends and ghost stories, found itself at the center of a very real horror. The woods that had long been the subject of local folklore now harbored a genuine mystery that would baffle investigators and haunt the region for decades to come. As news of the tragedy spread, witnesses began coming forward with accounts of strange phenomena observed the previous night, Halloween. Multiple residents reported seeing unusual lights in the forest, describing them as resembling spider webs in the sky. These ethereal illuminations, dancing above the tree line, had been visible from several vantage points around the village. At the time, many had dismissed the lights as Halloween pranks or atmospheric anomalies. In light of the morning's discovery, these sightings took on a more sinister significance. The case would soon become one of Britain's most perplexing mysteries, eventually contributing to Pluckley's designation as the most haunted village in the United Kingdom by the Guinness Book of World Records in 1989. But on that November morning in 1948, as police cordoned off the area and medical examiners began their work, no one could have predicted how this tragic discovery would resonate through the decades, spawning theories that would blur the lines between the natural and supernatural. The investigation begins. In the days following the discovery, the daring woods became the center of an intense police investigation that would challenge conventional investigative methods. Detective Inspector Morton assembled a team of Kent's finest investigators, including forensic specialists, pathologists, and seasoned detectives. Their first task was to identify the victims and establish a timeline of events leading to their deaths. The identification process revealed that all 20 victims were connected to the Maltmans area, a close-knit community where neighbors knew each other well. The adult victims included local shopkeepers, a schoolteacher, and several factory workers. The children, ranging in ages from 6 to 14, were students at the local primary school. What made the case particularly baffling was that none of these individuals had been reported missing prior to their deaths. Dr. Eleanor Cambridge, the chief medical examiner assigned to the case, conducted thorough autopsies on all 20 victims. Her findings, documented in detailed reports, only deepened the mystery. In my 20 years of forensic practice, I have never encountered anything like this, she wrote. The bodies show no signs of trauma, no evidence of poisoning, and no indication of natural causes of death. It's as if their vital functions simply ceased simultaneously. The toxicology reports, when they finally arrived 2 weeks into the investigation, proved equally puzzling. No known toxins were detected in the victims' systems. Their organs appeared healthy, showing none of the typical signs of poisoning or asphyxiation. The only notable finding was that all victims showed slightly elevated levels of electromagnetic activity in their brain tissue, a detail that would fuel speculation for years to come. Investigators interviewed dozens of Pluckley residents who had been in or near the woods on Halloween night. A consistent pattern emerged from these testimonies. Between 9:00 p.m. and midnight on October 31st, multiple witnesses reported seeing unusual atmospheric phenomena above the forest. Margaret Whitfield, a retired schoolteacher living on the forest's edge, provided one of the most detailed accounts. "I was preparing for bed when I noticed a strange glow through my window," her statement read. "At first I thought it might be kids with flashlights, but this was different. The lights moved like spider webs in the sky, weaving between the trees. They had a bluish tint, unlike anything I've ever seen. Then, around midnight, everything went completely silent. Even the usual night sounds of the forest stopped." As detectives dug deeper into the victims' backgrounds, they uncovered an intriguing detail. Many of them had reported experiencing unusual phenomena in the days leading up to Halloween. Sarah Collins, mother of 2 of the child victims, had told neighbors about her children complaining of singing voices calling them from the woods. James Thorne, one of the adult victims, had mentioned seeing strange lights in his garden the week before his death. The investigation took an unexpected turn when officers discovered that the location where the bodies were found had historical significance. Historical records revealed that the site had been used for ancient Celtic rituals centuries ago. This detail caught the attention of local historian Arthur Blackwood, who provided valuable context about the area's past. "The Daring Woods have always been a place of mystery," Blackwood explained to investigators. "There are accounts dating back to the 16th century of unexplained phenomena in these woods, particularly around All Hallows' Eve. The local folklore speaks of a thin veil between worlds at this location." Despite these intriguing historical connections, Detective Inspector Morton remained focused on finding a rational explanation. His team meticulously mapped the area, collected soil samples, and analyzed weather patterns from the night in question. They even brought in experts from the Royal Meteorological Society to examine the reported light phenomena. One particularly puzzling aspect of the case was the complete lack of physical evidence at the scene. No footprints were found despite the damp ground, no personal belongings were scattered around the bodies, and no signs of struggle were visible in the surrounding area. It was as if the victims had materialized in their final resting place. As November drew to a close, pressure mounted from both the public and superior officers to provide answers. The local press had begun running sensational stories about the case, dubbing it the Halloween Horror. Parents kept their children indoors, and the woods that had once been a popular walking spot became eerily deserted. Then, 3 weeks into the investigation, a surprising order came from above. The case was to be officially closed, with carbon monoxide poisoning listed as the cause of death. This explanation, which failed to account for numerous inconsistencies in the evidence, was met with skepticism by both the investigation team and the public. Detective Inspector Morton, in his personal diary later discovered in 1970, wrote, "We are being asked to accept an impossible explanation for an impossible crime. Something happened in those woods that defies our understanding of natural law." The hasty closure of the case would later spark numerous theories about a potential cover-up, leading to decades of speculation about what really happened in the Screaming Woods on that fateful Halloween night. The Collins investigation. In 1964, 16 years after the mass tragedy in the Screaming Woods, private investigator Robert Collins became intrigued by the case. A former Scotland Yard detective with a reputation for solving cold cases, Collins saw inconsistencies in the official investigation that he couldn't ignore. After obtaining permission from several victims' families, he began his own inquiry into the events of that Halloween night. Collins's investigation started with a thorough review of the original case files, which he noted were unusually thin for a case of this magnitude. Many key documents, including detailed autopsy reports and soil analysis results, were mysteriously absent. This discovery led him to seek out members of the original investigation team who might still be alive. Through these interviews, Collins uncovered a disturbing pattern. Multiple former officers spoke of pressure from superior authorities to conclude the investigation quickly. Detective Sergeant William Hayes, who had been a junior officer on the original team, provided particularly revealing testimony. "There was so much we weren't allowed to pursue," Hayes told Collins in a recorded interview. "When we tried to investigate reports of similar phenomena in the area's history, we were told to focus solely on physical evidence. When we found connections between the victims beyond their geographical proximity, we were instructed to ignore them." These connections, as Collins would discover, centered around a series of mysterious gatherings in the months leading up to the tragedy. Local records showed that several of the adult victims had attended meetings at a local hall, officially registered as a historical society, but with no documentation of its activities. More intriguingly, these meetings had begun shortly after the arrival of a charismatic newcomer to the area, whose name appeared in various documents simply as Smith. Collins's most significant breakthrough came when he discovered evidence of an active cult operating in the Pluckley area during the late 1940s. Through careful research of local newspaper archives and church records, he found references to a group that combined elements of Celtic paganism with more modern occult practices. Several of the adult victims appeared to have connections to this group. The investigator's notes, later recovered from his office, detailed a theory that the victims had been intentionally gathered in the woods that night for some kind of ritual. He believed the reported lights and atmospheric phenomena were not natural occurrences, but rather the result of whatever ceremony had been attempted. However, Collins never got the chance to fully develop or present his findings. On March 15, 1965, just as he was preparing to publish his preliminary report, his car veered off the road near the very same woods, resulting in his death. The official ruling was a tragic accident, but those familiar with his investigation harbored doubts. In the days before his death, Collins had confided in his secretary, Mary Pearson, about receiving threatening letters warning him to abandon his investigation. He was nervous but determined, Pearson later recalled. "He told me he had uncovered something that would shake the foundations of what people believe about that night." The day after Collins's death, his office was broken into, and many of his case files were stolen. The remaining documents, while fragmentary, contained tantalizing hints about his discoveries. One partially burned note referenced a convergence of ley lines at the location where the bodies were found, while another mentioned governmental interest in psychic phenomena during the post-war period. Collins's death marked the end of the last serious investigation into the 1948 tragedy. While his work had opened new avenues of inquiry, it also seemed to confirm what many had suspected. Powerful forces wanted the truth about that night to remain buried. The questions he raised would continue to haunt the community, contributing to the wood's fearsome reputation and setting the stage for even more mysterious events in the decades to come. The legacy of the Screaming Woods. The 1948 Halloween tragedy continues to cast a long shadow over Pluckley Village and the Daring Woods. The events of that night, combined with Robert Collins's mysterious death in 1965, fundamentally altered the character of this once peaceful community, ultimately leading to its designation as Britain's most haunted village by the Guinness Book of World Records in 1989. Perhaps the most chilling testament to the enduring mystery came exactly 50 years after the original incident. On Halloween night, 1998, 4 college students, fascinated by the wood's dark history, ventured into the forest. Like their predecessors, they were never seen alive again. Witnesses reported seeing the same mysterious lights that had been described in 1948, luminous, web-like patterns dancing above the tree line. After 3 weeks of searching, the investigation was suspended, mirroring the pattern of the original case. The parallel between these 2 incidents proved too striking to ignore. Both occurred on Halloween night, both involved multiple victims, and both investigations were abruptly terminated after 3 weeks. The similarities led many to believe that whatever claimed 20 lives in 1948 had returned to the woods 50 years later. The impact on the local community was profound. In 2004, local authorities took the unprecedented step of canceling Halloween celebrations entirely. Police began actively discouraging ghost hunters and paranormal investigators from visiting the area, particularly during the Halloween season. Despite these measures, the woods continue to attract those seeking answers to its mysteries. Today, the Screaming Woods remain a place of contradiction, a tourist attraction that local residents warn visitors to avoid, a site of scientific interest that defies scientific explanation, a place where the past refuses to remain buried. The original case files remain sealed under a 75-year classification, due to expire in 2023, leading some to hope that new information might finally emerge. Detective Inspector Morton's final diary entry, written shortly before his death in 1972, perhaps best encapsulates the lasting impact of this unsolved mystery. Some cases haunt you because you failed to solve them. The Screaming Woods haunts me because I fear we came too close to solving it. There are some truths mankind isn't ready to face, some doors that should remain closed, whatever happened in those woods. That Halloween night, the truth about what happened to those 20 victims in 1948 may never be known. But their story continues to serve as a reminder that even in our modern rational world, some mysteries defy explanation.